What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. We're going to go over and review the PTR buffs that went up a couple days ago and what it may mean for the competitive meta moving forward. We can't ignore the Roadhog in the room because he got the biggest changes. Aside from talking about the balance of his hook rework, I just want to say it feels great. If you haven't had the chance to get on to the PTR and test out the new Roadhog, I suggest you do, because the express goals of making him more reliable as well as responsive are indeed the case. The target slows down when you make connections, making it harder for them to make a quick dash away, like around a corner, breaking the line of sight of the new, relatively new line of sight mechanics that the hook has to maintain, and also the spread is more reliable in general. But I think the one major change that may go unnoticed is the delay period that's been reduced from half a second to 0.3 of a second. That's really important because even though it's slowing a character's momentum, there's still a lot of cases where on the live version of the game, the target might be falling behind cover, out of your line of sight, or I would say with the way the lag and latency of everything works, causes for a lot of times for it to show that your hook landed, but the target was able to blink away or put the Rein shield up to block and disconnect the hook from actually pulling the target in. I think you'll find that it taking a shorter amount of time to begin pulling means that you'll win in a lot more of those situations where the target would break free when they probably shouldn't have. So all these things considered, Roadhog is the reliable character that he's advertised to be, but does that make a difference in his power level? Will he deliver us into an entire new meta? I don't think he himself is strong enough to be a cornerstone hero, but I think you more easily can decide to play him, especially if you're a specialist in specific matchups. I think he's already pretty good against Symmetra and Doomfist, and now that it's harder to escape, even Tracers and Genjis, who on the live version of the game feel very slippery against hook even when you land it, can get shut down by your skill shot as well. But his real problem has been tanks. You see, there was one point in time where Roadhog dominated the tank meta and melted all of them, but after they reworked his damage and made him more durable rather than lethal, sure, he's good in a few tank matchups like against Winston and Hammond, but against Zarya, Rein, and even Orisa a lot of the time, he doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. Now, I put a bit of an asterisk there because also I think there's a big segment of the community that sees Roadhog as this shield-breaking master. He's one of the best siege characters in the game, but the issue isn't whether or not Roadhog can put some work in on a barrier from range. We know he can do that. The problem for me is that playing to break barriers has been bad for a very long time, and only works against enemy tanks that don't know either when to avoid damage or when to commit and close the distance on you. I know in a lot of ranks, tanks sort of just stand in a choke and lose their shield, and it's easy farming, but once a Rein Zarya learns to run over you, especially with the help of Brigitte, well, the idea of playing for shield break traditionally was pretty bad. But I'm going to elaborate on this further as we go over the other characters that got changed, because it looks like Blizzard may be trying to gear shield breaking to be a bit more viable, and if that concludes properly, perhaps Roadhog could start to see a place once again. Before we get onto that point, though, we're going to go on to talk about Reaper for a bit, because, well, he directly counters Roadhog, and also his changes most significantly show up in the Roadhog matchup. So, against the really big targets like Hog or Doomfist, that's where I think you're going to be seeing the biggest impact for his increased lifesteal, making it even harder for Roadhog to win the duel against a Reaper. My assumption is, anyway, that with Roadhog being a bit better, they wanted something to keep him in check, so they raised Reaper's lifesteal, which, frankly, is a passive that doesn't come into effect a lot of the time in squishy duels. Why? Well, if the squishy target you're hitting only has 200 life to begin with, there's not a whole lot of life for you to sap. Whereas, if you're hitting big spread damage into a tank, especially into his head, and he's getting healed, you're getting a lot of sustain out of that. Which is why you're only really going to notice the increased lifesteal from Reaper when he's shooting tanks. But does that mean Reaper is good against some of these tank-heavy compositions that are really strong in the metagame right now? Well, no. Not really. And this may come to a surprise to a lot of people because the first thing you might think of is that Reaper is really good against tanks. But his problem is, against these multi-tank lineups, this has been the case every time there's been 3 or 4 tanks. Goat's Comp is just a variant of that. Reaper doesn't look very good because Reaper is good at isolating tanks. But if the entire team comp is tanks, there's just too many bubbles and damage denial abilities and shields and what have you in his way, and most of the tanks are close range damage dealers. So he really struggles to stand his ground and avoid the focus fire of the max brawl comps, because remember, Rein and Brigitte's hammer penetrates past barriers to focus down targets, including Brigitte's stun combo, so any character that wants to get too close to the action can be difficult to save, which is why so often when you're playing up against a comp like that, you feel like you have to have a Zarya, and the main reason is because Zarya's bubble is the only tanking in the game that stops melee damage. And even in a situation where you were to, let's say, Zarya bubble the Reaper, well, they have so much healing and, worse yet, armor that his damage doesn't get online quick enough to isolate a tank most of the time. He would have to probably go for a healer when up against those multi-tank comps, and sure, if you kill one of them, that always works, but there's a lot of things that can kill healers, which is why a character like Doomfist often gets played instead of Reaper against 3-3 comps. So, all things considered, not looking too hot for Reaper, but I don't think most of Ranked plays 3-3 because it actually takes more coordination to use and do well than a lot of people give it credit for, but often Zarya, Rein, and Brig are mainstays, so he'll look okay against them. When there's not a diva as well in the mix eating up his shots, he can look a little bit better, but nothing to write home about. However, if you take everything I just explained about how Reaper struggles against that kind of comp, I think we've found the hidden gem that Blizzard was engineering when they put Brigitte into the game. Our Lord and Savior, Symmetra. Yes, I am not kidding. And it all surrounds the beam. Oftentimes with the reworks, Blizzard is trying to future-proof the meta for upcoming comps. But I think in the case of Brigitte, they didn't plan accordingly enough. They're usually a bit more ahead of this kind of thing. For example, when Doomfist came out, Roadhog got changed to be more durable, to be able to handle him. We can debate whether that was a success or not, but very clearly Blizzard takes these steps in advance in order to get ready for the next hero to come out. I'm sure much of this has to do with the upcoming hero we're going to get at BlizzCon as well, but I think a lot of it surrounds Brigitte, especially as we have now the Torb rework that is good against armor, and we have the Symmetra rework that's good against shields, and now really good against shields. Symmetra's big buff was that she got 20% increased charge rate on her primary fire, getting it to that level 3 beam a whole heck of a lot faster. Now, Symmetra's issue is that even with a beam buff, it's hard to use the beam a lot of the time, except against a 3-3 comp in my opinion. You see, if the enemy has range damage and Sim tries to go out in the open and fight, well, it's going to be pretty hard for her. She's exploitable, and if there's any threat whatsoever, she sort of has to hide away and spam from range, and even if she does get in a duel, even with the buff, she's still going to want to use the charge shot to burst her foes down. But very specifically, up against the Rein Zarya meta comp right now, I think at least it seems possible that the GOAT's rushdown has finally met its match. Why is that? Well, one, Symmetra has a teleporter, so her biggest weakness of getting caught out won't matter as much because the GOAT's comp doesn't have any range to begin with, and teleporter should get her to safety. And combining that, if you are able to keep the Symmetra alive, it doesn't take too long for it to ramp up. After a couple seconds, she'll be doing 180 damage per second, and she's the only character in the entire game that gets any benefit from shooting shields, because she can ramp her beam off doing so, but while she's shooting it, she's getting her ammo back, allowing her to keep firing. 180 damage, that's 10 less than Zarya's 100% charged beam. In theory anyway, as long as you can keep the Symmetra alive and she wins the footsie game with her teleporter, she's going to be an upgrade on Reaper against that comp because she'll be able to put a big volume of hurt from the front, which is important because prior to this point, pretty much the only thing that could reliably beat the GOAT's comp was flanking it, which can work, don't get me wrong, but it requires you to outplay your opponent, whereas they just have to W towards you, so something to threaten them to actually be afraid of running over things would be a major game changer. Oddly enough, the two best characters that can handle the 3-3 brawl comp right now are the builders, and I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it may be the case that a Symmetra Torb duo DPS could be a meta answer to a well-established comp, and if that happens, I think the collective Overwatch community's heads will explode. The problem is, of course, that characters like Torb and Symmetra are weak to all sorts of other things, which prompts me to want to go on a side rant about how important it is that Overwatch starts to toy around and figure out a draft mode or some limitations on how the hero selections work, because I'm not a huge fan of this rock, paper, scissors approach to everything. I mean, yes, counters are good in general, but it's kind of a problem if we're asking a team to say, well, you're going on Lijiang Control Center. The enemy could run goats, so if you want to counter it, you can play Symmetra Torb. Okay, great. Now what happens when they come out with a standard comp with range damage dealers players, what, you're supposed to lose that fight outright because you picked the wrong heroes? The counters in this game are getting sharper and sharper. I'd like to see a hero draft that gives both teams like 9 or 10 heroes in their pool for a given map. So you're still allowed to swap, but also as well, there's some limitations and foresight into what you and the enemy can run so you actually can plan accordingly. Because otherwise, trying to balance, let's say, like builders to be a legitimate counterpick option to a certain comp doesn't really get builders into play. It'll more so make that other comp disappear because pro teams try to find what's the most reliable. And hey, I would love to see a match where 2 builders get picked in a pro match, but it's kind of hard for these things to happen unless constraints are made prior to the match beginning. Am I harshing the mellow on this one? Should we all just be hyped for the Symmetra meta that's going to end the 3-3 goats comp? Okay, I'm the ruiner of fun. The last change that we're going to cover as well is Mercy. Last but not least, because I think the most important character of all to get to work to actually make this shield break composition a thing is Mercy. Why? Well, because damage amp is the only thing that helps you shred barriers faster, and often I think players forget why Mercy's damage amp is sometimes better than Discord Orb, because obviously Discord, really strong, lets all of your team focus on the same target and burn it down. That's great. But often you need mobility to do it because you got to go get angles on that target for those multiple sources of damage to be able to amp on one thing and burst it down. Whereas Mercy's damage amp can be done safely from afar to give you a range damage advantage or to really beef up your splash damage. Or as in the example I'm showing on screen, the cleave damage of Winston. Here we're playing up against goats on the live version of the game, and the Mercy damage amp is really helping Winston's damage be effective. And I love trying to mix in Mercy into compositions. I think she's an interesting piece that, as long as she's not drastically overpowered, can be used to nudge your team comp one way or another. And do we think that the PTR buffs are enough to see her get more play? Well, let's think about what got changed. I actually messed up in my video because I think I just wanted Mercy's healing beam to go back to 60 healing a second. So much so that that's what I read on the patch notes, but if you didn't catch our clarifications in the comments or on Twitter, I apologize. She only heals for 60 in Valkerye form. So her normal heal beam is still 50 healing a second. Winston will still zap you through it. And the thing is, I wish they would just up and revert it back to 60 again, because its ability to be able to save you from, let's say, a Winston zapping your Zenyatta is what made it useful as a healing entity at all. It was that reliable instant pocket heal that you could save a teammate that made it good. Whereas now, I'd go so far to say that you should just try to not heal with Mercy as much as you can and let your Ana heal and play Mercy as a damage amp res character, because that's where you're actually going to see value. Damage amp the right thing actually makes them effective, lets them get their ultimate faster, and you won't be stealing healing from Ana, who's got the better ult than you anyway. Because the thing is, Valkyrie is just not very good. It getting 60 healing a second doesn't get me excited at all, because if you're in the ult phase, whether Mercy has 60 healing or 50 healing doesn't really make much of a difference, because most of the time, if you're ulting, the enemy's ulting, and 60 healing a second isn't saving from most ults. However, I will say the other buff she got perhaps may start to make Valk good, because it got a 15% increase in charge rate, meaning that you'll get Valks more often. This is very important, because you don't want to use Valk as a safety measure up against anything. You want to use Valk to go aggressive, pop damage amp on your whole team, break the enemy barriers, whittle them down, and win a team fight with your offense. Healing is nice, but most of the time, if you're trying to heal with Mercy's Valk, it can be hard to heal as many members as you need, and you can't really clutch save them because it doesn't heal enough. 60, okay, it's finally enough to save the target from a Winston, but still, it's nowhere near on par with the likes of Transcendence, Sound Barrier, or even Nano Boost, because healing most of your team for a small amount with Valkyrie isn't as impactful as saving a teammate or guaranteeing a Dragon Blade or whatever with Nano Boost. It's a much bigger deal. You actually can swing cooldowns that way. But I will say, the increased charge rate on her ult was definitely noticeable. Mercies were popping Valk very quickly, and with that, there's going to be situations where you have a Mercy Valk before the enemy has any of their support ults, and that's a really big deal. I think especially playing Mercy with Winston and dive comp is a very important component in all of this, because Mercy is the only character that can go in with the dive as a support bar like Lucio, but if you're good with Mercy's movement, you actually can be near the action, but also able to escape danger at the same time, whereas other supports like Zenyatta and Ana, they can struggle to get their utility into a place, to go aggressive with it. If there's barriers in Zenyatta's way, he can't get Discord Orb on the target you need, whereas Mercy can fly in with the dive tanks, put damage amp on Winston or Genji or whoever, and confirm those kills. I still think Mercy's pretty good on the live version of the game as well, but this will look even better moving forward, making the selection of the hero even easier. And perhaps she may even be able to move a bit away from damage amping like 2/3 of the time, like I think you probably should do right now, and instead farm up early Valkyries, which could prove to be very significant because a dive going in with a Valkyrie to damage amp them, if you don't have any ults to stop that, it's winning the fight. That's a really big deal. Or if we contrast to all of everything we've said earlier in the video, specifically dealing with all of the shielding that is in the way nowadays, shield break can be a thing if Mercy is a strong character or viable and playable. Because when you're going up against a 3-3 comp, if Mercy has Valkyrie much earlier than the 3-3 comp has their ults online, well, you can pop Valk, get your damage amp going, and break their barriers before they close the distance. That's all the difference right there. The reason why shooting barriers is bad right now is because they last so long and there's so many of them between Bubbles, Ryan's shield, and Brigitte's shield that there's not enough firepower in the game most of the time to crack them before they've cracked your skull, and you've lost the objective attempting to hold your ground. But on the new patch of the game, tempo Valkyries might see that change a bit. So especially if you see like a Soldier 76 played defensively, dive tanks to counter dive, control space, Mercy can go in between the both of them, be hard to lock down, and bounce between buffing up the Soldier, pocketing the Winston, and back and forth again. That could be a very legit strat moving forward, or any shield break characters in there as well, on certain maps even Symmetra, and I'm certain some team is going to master the Symmetra or Risa bouncing that you can get away with, making it so that your bunker can't even get chased down by Reinhardt. And stacking these shield breaking components together in a comp might finally see the end of the barrier rushdown playstyle dominating the game. We mentioned a lot here today, so I want to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe because we do upload each and every day, so you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.